All right, good afternoon. Welcome to Friday afternoon of convention. We've almost made it. I hope everybody's having a great time. It is my pleasure and my honor to introduce to you Sharon Balin and Mark Battersby, who are experts in the field of critical thinking, particularly in critical inquiry projects. And it's a joy to have them join us at convention this year. I hope that you guys learn as much from them as I have over the past couple of years. So Mark, take it away.
Thank you, Christine. I want to also say we're delighted to be here. We're delighted to be here in particular, as we've learned that the curriculum commitments of the Alberta K-12 system, it maps very strongly onto ours. Critical thinking is seen as a cross-curricular competency, and inquiry is seen as a guiding idea throughout the curriculum. And that maps very well onto our approach, which is a critical inquiry approach, and fits with our concern. Also, our text offers ways to infuse critical thinking across the curriculum. Next slide. Someone has asked if the slides are going to be shared. Let me just tell you, all the slides are in the handouts. We define critical thinking, critical inquiry, as a careful examination of an issue in order to reach a reasoned judgment. And the Alberta curriculum defines critical thinking as a process of inquiry, analysis, and evaluation, resulting in reasoned judgment. Also, they describe thinking critically as engaging in deliberation with the intention of making a judgment based on appropriate criteria. And as you can see, there's a perfect mapping on between our approach and that of the Alberta curriculum. Critical thinking is not seen as a separate skill, but rather one that should be infused across the curriculum in all subject matters and at all grade levels. And the great power of this, if we can achieve it, is that students will really be induced into this critical thinking as a habit, as an inclination, and we will be very successful in making far more reasonable people in the long run. I might also add that critical thinking, the critical inquiry approach, is adds to the effectiveness of your teaching. Students engage with the material as they have to inquire and think about it, and it leads to what Jen Scott calls more permanent learning. So next slide. Here's a copy of our text, Reason and Balance, which elaborates in great detail our approach and has a number of chapters illustrating how to apply our approach to various subject matters. It features dialogues featuring a group of students in realistic situations dealing with real issues, designed to illustrate actually either how to properly do a deliberative dialogue or in some cases how not to. It also demonstrates the various aspects of inquiry and finally how to come to a reasoned judgment.
Okay, so we talked about our text as demonstrating some of the main aspects of inquiry. So what are some of these main aspects? Well, first of all, critical inquiry starts with a question that requires making a judgment. So it isn't just a topic like mammals or ancient Athens. It's a question, an issue that something students will want to find out, but not just a question requiring a kind of factual response, like what's the life cycle like of whales, or what was the governing structure of ancient Athens, but rather an issue where you have to actually make some kind of judgment, like was the governing structure of ancient Athens democratic? Would change that topic into a good inquiry question. And there are issues, once you start thinking in terms of issues, you'll see them all over the curriculum. You know, what are some of the issues that arise in or fit into the curriculum? How can you look at the curriculum in terms of issues? And an important aspect is that they should be issues, real issues that engage students, that they're interested in, and they're interested in actually finding an answer, making a judgment. And actually the best issues will come from the students. So a second aspect of critical inquiry is that it involves looking at all sides of the issue at different possible answers. In order to come to a reasoned judgment, you need to look at the evidence and the arguments on various sides of the issue. You can't just look at one side. So you can't just look at arguments that support the view you already have and kind of ignore the ones that don't. Although that's a very, very common, maybe universal human tendency. It's even got a name, my side bias, where we tend to just look for the arguments that support our view and not look for or ignore the opposing views. And that's something we need to really watch out for. And so in other words, one needs to look for the arguments pro and con. And we actually have a nice little heuristic, a pro-con table, which we'll show you after. Also, another problem that can come up here is starting with a conclusion. If you think about how we often ask students, the instructions that are often given to students in terms of writing an essay, they often say, well, start with your thesis and then write a paragraph to support your thesis and then state your conclusion. Well, that hasn't involved really an inquiry. It's involved just confirming your initial view. You need to really leave the conclusion till the end. You start with your issue, with your question, look at the arguments on both sides, and then come to your conclusion afterwards. Another important aspect to look at is the context of an issue. Real issues, tend to exist in a context, they didn't just come out of nowhere, but what's the current situation? If there's a debate going on, what's the history of it? What's the historical, the social, the political context? If you're looking at, for example, whether we should keep whales in captivity, what's the current situation? How is the debate about whether we should keep animals in captivity changed? There's a strong animal rights movement. These would be all aspects of context that you need to take into account when you're doing the inquiry. Next aspect is evaluating the information and arguments. So what makes an inquiry a critical inquiry is that you're going to evaluate. You're not just amassing, the students aren't just amassing information and arguments, but they're going to evaluate them critically, which means according to criteria, the criteria that are relevant in the area. So if it's in science, some criteria would be fit with experimental evidence, language arts, if you're doing an interpretation, that it's coherent. Criteria for a political decision might be fairness, legitimacy. And then really across all areas, there's logical reasoning. The arguments need to be logical. And an very important aspect of evaluating information and arguments is being able to identify appropriate and reliable sources of information. I think we're all painfully aware of the proliferation of misinformation through media and social media. And so the ability to actually identify what are appropriate and reliable sources of information is really crucial. Okay, after having done this, the idea is to come to a reasoned judgment. As he said, the critical inquiry isn't done just to amass information. It's to try to give some kind of response, come to some kind of judgment about the issue that was the reason for the inquiry. And it may be that there are very strong arguments on one side and weak on the other side, and it may be fairly easy to come to a judgment. But very often, if these are real issues that are actually debated, then there may well be strong and weak arguments on both sides. So after evaluating the arguments, there's a process of kind of weighing and balancing the reasons and the considerations. There might be what seems like a strong reason, but maybe one of the objections is stronger. Maybe there's an argument on the other side that kind of outweighs it. So at the end, there's a process of coming to a judgment, weighing and balancing the various considerations. So just to recap, the key features of critical inquiry starts with a question that requires making a judgment. It involves looking at all sides, considering the context, evaluating the information and arguments, and coming to a reasoned judgment. Now, our aim in trying to develop critical thinking and critical inquiry is certainly to try to develop people who have the capacities for reasoned judgment, who know how to go about coming to a reasoned judgment, but also an important aspect is to develop critical thinkers. That is, people who display what we call the spirit of inquiry, who will actually go out and think critically in their lives, who will take this, what they've learned, and use it in the world. I think, when Christine does her presentation, you can see how some of her kindergarten kids start actually spontaneously thinking critically, which is wonderful. So we want to develop people who also have then the relevant attitudes, habits of mind of a critical thinker, like being open-minded, fair-minded, intellectually curious, respectful of other ideas, and so on, and who will display these characteristics when they're participating in discussions, when they're conducting deliberative discussions with others. So given the importance of both learning, developing capacities for critical judgment, but also of the critical spirit, our pedagogical methods, our class structures, our relationships within class are crucially important. In order to learn to think critically, students need to have opportunities to practice critical thinking. They can't just be told about it, they have to be doing it. And the best, most effective way is with having students learning to inquire together in small groups. Certainly we found that, but also there's a great deal of research now that really points to the effectiveness and importance of small group discussion, small group inquiry for developing critical thinking. And another aspect it relates to the kind of atmosphere created in the class. It's important to try to develop a community of inquiry. That is a environment in the class where the habits of mind are modeled by the teacher, which means being open-minded and being open to student questions and all of that. And they're encouraged and expected of the students, that students know that that's how the class is conducted with this community of inquiry approach. So in terms of curriculum examples, we've just kind of brainstormed a few that might fit into the elementary curriculum. But here, it's really just a matter of looking at your curriculum and saying, where are the issues? And when you start thinking like this, the issues will, I think, pop out at you. But here are a few examples. Is an asteroid the best explanation for the extinction of the dinosaurs? Should single-use plastics be prohibited? To what extent was the government of ancient Athens truly democratic? Should I be allowed to play violent video games? Should we have to wear masks in school? And those are just a few examples. But I'm going to go through one example in a little more detail to try to kind of demonstrate, exemplify some of the aspects of the approach. So the question, the issue that we're going to look at is, should we keep whales in captivity? Now, what makes this an appropriate inquiry question? Well, it is a real controversial question. It is being actively debated. It's an issue that I think would interest students. Whales are fascinating. They've probably seen whales in aquaria, so they probably are quite interested in finding out more about them. And doing an inquiry on this topic will require students to find out about whales, to gather the necessary information, to acquire the content in some sense, but in a way that has a purpose, to make a judgment. So looking at both sides, we have our heuristic here, our pro-con table, which we, to our delight when we first came up with this idea, what was how students went with it. I mean, students just took this and started using it all over in their lives. It's quite wonderful. So here is an example of a pro-con table for lower grades, where you have the pros and the cons. And here, I'm giving you examples that I've filled out, but the students are doing this work. It's the students who are filling out, who are coming up with these reasons. What are pro reasons for keeping whales in captivity? What are reasons against it? And I've just, given a few examples of some of the kinds of reasons you could come up with. People enjoy looking at them. It gets people to appreciate and care about the natural world, a way of preserving the species. Some arguments against, well, it's harmful to whales to keep them in captivity. Whales are highly intelligent, so humans don't have a right to keep them in captivity. And, there are other reasons one could come up with. Now, for higher grades, one can make it a little more sophisticated by looking a little more at the whole debate. That is, what are some of the objections? So if there's a debate going on, then arguments are being offered, but people are objecting too. So what are some of the kinds of objections that you might come up with? The students can think of, well, what are objections to some of these arguments? Well, maybe in terms of getting people to appreciate and care about the natural world, an objection might be, well, a better way to appreciate the natural world is by being out in nature rather than seeing animals in captivity. In terms of cons, it's harmful to whales to keep them in captivity. Well, somebody might object, they often come to harm in the wild too. Okay, so just getting a sense of what are the arguments out there. Now, here, students would be coming up with these reasons, and also research comes in here because there is a debate going on. What are some of the arguments? Maybe they can only think of pro arguments. Well, what are some of the con arguments that people are making? So research is a part of this too, can be a part of this. Context. Context is important with this issue. What's the current situation? Well, there are many whales in captivity, and they're seem to be important for the survival of the aquariums. However, many aquariums have also stopped taking in new whales. In terms of history of the issue, well, we keep learning more about the capacities of whales, and that contributes to our evaluation of the issue. And generally, views about keeping animals in captivity have changed over time. This issue, there's a social context around this. There's a strong animal rights movement, for example. So that's an aspect of the social context that has an effect on the issue. So in terms of evaluation, here again, students are going to start to evaluate, again, depending on the level, perhaps with some help and guidance from the teacher. And one way to do that is to pose some questions. That is, what are some of the questions students might ask in order to evaluate some of these arguments? And let's take the pro argument. It gets people to appreciate and care about the natural world. Well, an objection, as we said, is a better way to learn to appreciate nature is by being out in nature. Well, question, can't you have both? Another question, well, most people actually get to see whales out in nature. If you live in Alberta, how easy is it for you to see a whale in nature? And then in terms of the con arguments, if you look at the first one, it's harmful to keep whales in captivity. An objection, whales often come to harm in the wild. Well, this is a factual question about what are the conditions, what happens to whales in captivity and in the wild. Here there's research. And when it's a factual question, a factual argument, then you're always going to need to ask, what does the research say? We can go and find out what the research says. And here, knowing what kind of sources to look at becomes really important. Okay, then coming to a reasoned judgment. So with this issue, the students might find that there are strong arguments on both sides. For example, the pro argument, having whales in aquariums is important for educating people about nature and helping them to appreciate nature. Well, that one might evaluate that as, that's a good argument. But there are also some con arguments that seem pretty strong, like captivity is harmful to whales, and there seems something problematic, wrong about humans keeping these intelligent creatures in captivity. So at this point, there's some kind of weighing and balancing going on. What considerations are stronger? What outweighs what? How do you come to a judgment? How do you weigh the different values involved? Now, it's important here also to realize that it's not the question. It's not a matter of coming to the one correct judgment about the issue. It's a question of students going through the process of coming up with the arguments, looking at both sides, evaluating them, and coming to a reasoned judgment that they can defend with reasons. That's the important part of this this whole process. Okay, now it's my great pleasure to turn the screen over to Christine Perot, who's a kindergarten teacher, and she can tell us a little more about herself, who has done some wonderful, exciting work with her kindergarten students using the critical inquiry approach. And anyone who thinks that you can't do critical thinking with young kids, Christine's approach will, I think, convince them otherwise. Christine.
Okay, so I'm Christine Perot. I teach in Lethbridge at Galbraith School, and I'm a kindergarten teacher there. So this is just a little bit of what we do. I am by no means an expert. I would consider myself an experienced novice still as I go through this. But I just kind of want to walk you through the process of how I've been doing critical inquiry projects with my kids over the past 3 years, just right from the get-go to the very end. And I'll show some artifacts from 2 of the projects we've done. One is completed, one is about, and lots of you have heard about it, is about our what is the best pet for us. And the one we're currently engaged in is should we wear our masks at school? So lots of really kind of cool things coming out of it. Some other projects we've looked at is why did the dinosaurs become extinct? We've looked at identity, and we were looking at how does my identity affect my friendships with others? And so just lots of different things that come out of some of the curriculum connections. Most of our long-term critical inquiry projects, though, come from questions that the kids are asking. Never did I ever in my teaching career expect that I would end up with a classroom pet, but it was a question that the students were asking and they really wanted one. And so that's where we got the idea from. It was things that kids were interested in. So that's kind of our starting point, is student interest. If we don't have student buy-in, then the projects kind of fizzle out in a day or 2. We also look for ties to the curriculum, making sure that, of course, we are always connected to the curriculum. And then the third sort of area that I get the ideas for my critical inquiry projects are just through different conceptual understandings that we're trying to build with the kids. So those are kind of the foundation for where the ideas come from. But usually it all starts with the kids and something that's just weighing on their mind or something that they really pick up on. So let's get right into it. Sharon, can you flip us to the next slide? So I like to start all my inquiry projects with kind of getting an idea of where the students are in their understandings, what they know, what they think they know, sort of questions they have, what are they wondering? So for the mask project, we actually started with a think I know and wonder chart. And we kept those charts going for the entire project. They are still adding to them on a regular basis. What's really cool is we always use the term think I know because we find a lot of misconceptions when we're doing this activity with them. So this is the should we wear our masks at school? And we started off with really basic comments from them, things like our masks keep us safe from COVID. They told me that the virus was humongous. And so they told me that their masks actually catch the germs and that we have to wear them to go outside and to keep others safe. That's kind of where we started. So already I noticed that they had some pretty big misconceptions or misunderstandings of what COVID was, what our masks were doing, why we were wearing them. And it really gave me a springboard for where we needed to go with our research, what sort of experts we needed to bring in, what types of books we needed to look at. Just so it really helped provide those next steps for us. As the project has been going on, we're seeing a lot of progress in sort of their thinking and their understanding of what's happening. And what was really cool is we've seen a shift in the kids' thinking from this is about keeping me safe to this is about keeping other people safe. So it's kind of interesting to see the growth in their thoughts. And then as we're nearing the end, they're starting to look at things like our masks aren't enough. So it's really interesting. We start to see in their list things like we have to wash our hands, germs make us sick. And then they started talking about we need to do more than wear our masks. And they started talking about social distancing. So really starting to get a better handle on the issues and the things that are happening in the world around them. Their wonderings at the start were very, very basic. This is our most recent wonder chart that the kids did. And you can see that now they're really starting to look in there. They're asking those big questions. So these come from the kids. These aren't teacher directed at all. We just say, what are you still wondering about? What are you still thinking? What questions do we still have? And their questions are really developing as we go along. And again, at the beginning, very, very surface level questions, right? They wanted to know things like, how do you get the pictures? How do they get pictures on the masks? Those sorts of things. And now they're kind of asking those, like, do they really keep us safe? How safe do they keep us? They are 5, so of course they are gross. And they ask things like, do we actually need to wash our masks? And how often do we need to wash our masks? Then they started looking at the different types of masks, and they started wondering, well, is there a kind that works better? Are all our masks equal? What should we be looking for in those? And most recently, they started asking about vaccines, which I think is really fascinating because a lot of people kind of think that the kids are too little, that they're too young for us to be exposing them to this kind of stuff. But the reality is they're getting exposed to it. They're hearing the news, they're hearing what's going on around them. And the critical inquiry projects are a great way for us to help them process what's happening in the world around them, to help them sort of see and make sense of the world. This one was a bit of a risky one because we did present some anti-mask information for them. So we did present some people who did not believe in mask wearing and they got to explain their side of the story as well. So it was interesting and it was exciting, and I'm nervous for the outcome, but I'm hoping for the best. Can we go to the next slide? Because I'm going to show you the next step that we did is we created a pro-con list. So we started looking at what do we like about our masks, right? Not even so much looking at the broader picture, just for themselves, what did they like about the masks? And they started talking about the things that they didn't like about the masks. And because we live in Lethbridge, my very favorite answer was that it blocks the wind. And we actually have several kids who wear their masks outside for recess because of that. It blocks the wind. So that's kind of fun. And again, we see that same sort of progression where it keeps me warm, keeps me safe. And then we slowly start to unravel and start looking at the people around us, and they start talking about, well, they help keep other people safe. So it's really interesting to watch sort of that egocentric move to the broader community. And same with the cons again, right? Starting off with, it's hot, it hurts my ears, it fogs up my glasses. I totally relate. Get those kids. I hear you. It's just the hard to hear people. And as it was going, you could see that they were starting to take the information from the anti-maskers and putting that into their understandings, because then we had a long conversation about false sense of security and how when we wear our masks, we think we're completely safe, but we actually aren't. And there's more things that we need to do. So some really fascinating things are coming out and making that visible thinking there and giving us a good idea of where the kids are at, what they're thinking. And again, the pro-cons really help us find those misconceptions and just conceptual pieces that are missing for them. Can we look at the next one? So this is the Which Pet Should We Get project. And we took a little bit of a different approach with this one because it's a very different question. So we came at it from a different angle. And we started off by talking about animals and animal needs. We talked about what would make a good pet, what wouldn't make a good pet. We quickly found out that there was definitely some conceptual misunderstandings because for the longest time we had a flamingo on the list of an animal that would be a good pet. So we had some background knowledge to work on. So the kids broke off into groups. So we had small groups. We did all our literacy in small groups. They were researching the animal that they thought would be the best pet, and they created a poster about that animal. So there's one of the posters which was about the chinchilla, and they had to come up with a pro and con list for their animal as well, so that when they presented the animal that they thought would be a good pet to the rest of the class, they had already gone through and said, this is why this animal would be a really good animal, and this is why the animal would not be a good animal. So that they had already thought through that whole process. The pro-con list is actually for the guinea pigs, which is the animal we ended up with in the end. And again, in true 5-year-old fashion, one of their cons is that they can poop in your hand. So lots of fun there. But yeah, so again, just really, really tailoring it to the project, to the questions, and to the groups of kids, right? And just finding their level, finding their understanding, and then building them up and growing them from there. And can we go to the next slide? So then the next thing I try to do is try to look at the bigger context for the kids. So putting, this is our issue, this is our tiny little piece. How does that fit into the broader world? And trying to build and develop sort of that universal understanding. So with the masks, we looked at the context that there was a really big problem in Alberta because they were getting two different messages. The kids were hearing that our city bylaws said anybody over the age of 2 had to wear a mask in public, but the provincial guidelines said anybody in school, grade 4 and up, had to wear their mask. So there was a discrepancy in the information they were getting. There was also a constant, can I take my mask off? Can I take my mask off? Do I have to wear my mask? Those sorts of questions kept coming and kept coming. And so we knew that they had this context that they were trying to figure out. So we had that piece already figured out. And then I wanted them to sort of see masks as a concept of that whole picture. So we took a look at the world of work and OH&S sorts of pieces and what types of jobs do people have, and we brought in that community helpers element from our curriculum. So we looked at firefighters, we looked at construction workers, we looked at people in the medical field. We talked about why they wear masks and what those different masks did. And of course, that's when you bring in your virtual guest speakers at this point in time, but to share sort of that component. Then we took a look at the historical piece. We had a fascinating conversation one day about what the word unprecedented means and how this actually has happened before. And we took a look at pictures from the Spanish flu and looked at kids that were wearing masks at that time and kind of talked through that historical perspective for them, which was interesting because it was something new for me because I hadn't done a lot of work with sort of historical thinking with 5-year-olds because I wasn't sure that they would get it, because yesterday is any day but today, and tomorrow is any day that's going to happen that's not today. And so it was interesting to see how they could actually figure out, like, this was a long time ago, and so it was really cool to start developing that sort of historical thinking for them as well. Then we looked at a picture from World War II with kids in England wearing gas masks. That was awesome because we quickly realized that these kids did not have a concept of World War II. They thought the kids had made elephant costumes and were getting ready for a parade, and they thought they were going scuba diving. And so it was really interesting to do some of our thinking routines about making claims and supporting those claims. And I'll talk about that in a little bit too. And then we looked at a picture of a plague doctor, and we talked about how during the Black Plague, the outfit that the doctors wore, and we talked about why and how the long beaks had different herbs in them and why they did that and what they thought was going to happen. So, and then again, tying that into sort of what are we thinking our masks are doing? What are we thinking our hand washing is doing? Going through all of those sorts of pieces as well. And then one of the kids actually brought in a cultural mask. And so we started talking about that too, and talking about that cultural piece and how masks are used in theater. We talked about masks in Halloween. So just really kind of rounding out that picture of masks for them. And yeah, they came a long ways. They're doing really good. And I'm really excited about the level of understanding that they're showing, because you just never know. When we looked at the PET project, our context mapping looked a little bit different because we were looking at it in terms of what was common practice, right? So what would typically be a classroom pet? What have they seen on TV? What have their friends, their siblings, anybody else had for classroom pets? Then we talked about their needs and wants. So we brought in that concept of a need versus a want and sort of what they were looking for. And then we took it into an even bigger field and we looked at the school district policy. So what were the rules around pets for us? And I noticed in the research part, when they were sort of researching their animals and what they thought they liked and what was good about animals and their habitats and those sorts of things, we realized that there was some struggle with understanding information texts. And so we really focused on that by going through the school district policy. And we actually read the actual policy to them and then started breaking it down and teaching them what do good readers do? If we come across this word and we don't know what it means, what do we do? So through the development of the context map, we were also working on some important literacy skills with them as well. Next slide. I feel like I'm talking really fast. So how do we build understanding of context with these little guys? So this is the picture of the Spanish flu that I was talking about earlier. So we do a lot of the see, think, wonder sorts of things to help build that context. What are you seeing? What are you thinking? What are you wondering? What's happening in this picture, right? And at this point, we really focus on learning that skill of making a claim and then supporting your claim and then finding evidence that goes against your claim so that you can make a reasoned decision. So just breaking it down into a sort of a smaller unit of that. Taking field trips, having guest speakers, lots of stories, and then again, bringing in that research piece just to help make sure that they have a full understanding of that context. Yeah, and next slide. So we haven't got this far with the masks. The kids are still asking a lot of questions and they aren't ready to make their decision yet. And they're not done with the topic, which surprised me. I thought we would have been done by the end of January, but they're not. They are still going strong with it. So we've got some gross experiments. I can't wait to get back to school and see what our gross experiments are growing. But so they haven't got to the reasoned judgment or the decision day yet. With our pet project, what we did is we had a day where all the kids got to share their poster. So they shared their poster, they shared their pros and cons, and then the kids asked them questions. And so they said, well, what did you think about this? Have you thought about that? And what was great is anybody who's ever done show and share knows how painful that experience can be because they ask those static standard questions. Where did you get it? Where do you keep it? Who got it for you? Why do you like it? But when we came to the decision day, to the reasoned judgment day, they were actually asking on topic specific questions, which was fascinating to see that they had developed enough of that background knowledge, enough understanding of the context, enough of those pros and cons and what the consequences could be, that they were asking meaningful questions. After all the kids shared their presentation and did their pros and cons and answered their questions, we had a vote, and we did it a secret ballot vote. So we brought a little democracy for them. And I was worried because I thought, like, there's going to be tears. There's going to be tears when we choose a pet and it's not whichever one wins wasn't your team's pet. And so I asked them if we had to be unanimous in our decision, if it could be majority rules. And they said, no, majority would be fine. Whatever the most of us want, then we can get that pet. So I was like, all right, here we go. And all of the kids except for one chose the guinea pig as the animal that should win. And the one that didn't he was firm believer that we should get a gecko, that we were getting a lizard, and that was all there was to it. And so it was interesting because I kind of watched and I wanted to see if, there was hurt feelings that their pets didn't. And because they had been so involved in the whole process and they had been a part of those pro-con lists, they've had a chance to ask the questions. They were the decision makers. There were no tears. There was nobody who was upset, and they all bought into the next phase. And of course, the next phase was our call to action, which meant that they had to make up a financial plan of how they were going to raise money to one, get the pets, and then two, how they were going to be able to pay for and maintain these animals after we got them. And then, of course, after that, they decided to hold a dance. And so they had to make cookies, and they worked a concession to make their money. And so we were working on adding and subtracting and lots of fun things like that. And it was fabulous. I'm hoping that when we're done the mask project, that hopefully they they will choose to wear their masks. And then we'll make some public announcements, whether it be posters or maybe they'll get on the school announcements and or share some little videos with other classes about why they should be wearing their masks, or maybe why they shouldn't be, or maybe they'll talk, it might turn into videos about all the precautions that they should be taking to make sure that they're safe. Again, it just totally is going to depend on what happens on Reasoned Judgment Day. So yeah, I think that's my last slide. What I did want to touch on though is because doing an entire critical inquiry project can feel overwhelming. And I know when I first started, I was like, holy doodles, what am I getting myself into, right? What is all of this? And so I found ways to really break it down, and even just simply starting with make a claim, support that claim, and is there any evidence against your claim, right? So looking at a picture, the picture of the Spanish flu, one of the little girls came out and said, I think it's winter. And so we're like, okay, support that claim. What in that picture tells you that it's winter? And so the class came up with a list of things of why it was winter. And then I said, okay, is there any evidence that maybe it's not winter? Maybe it's another season. And they created a list of all those reasons. And then they were able to compare the two, and we came to a reasoned decision, right? So it's easy even just to shorten it, to make it just little blips in your day of putting that critical inquiry in, just snippets. Now, what's really cool, I do have one more slide. I totally forgot, because this is the coolest part, because learning inside the classroom is fantastic, and we want them to learn inside the classroom. But the transfer is the big one. We want to see this habits of mind, these critical thinking skills go beyond teacher-directed learning. And so this is really, really fun, because this little guy, he came running up to me with some writing that he had done, and he said, take my picture, I want it in my portfolio. And I was like, absolutely, and it's busy. So I snapped a real quick picture, threw it in his portfolio. And then that night when I went to look at his portfolio, I realized what he had done. So what he had actually done is he had created his own pro-con list about snow. So on the one side, he put, you can play in snow and he's happy. But on the other side, he wrote, but it's cold. Right? So he was all on his own, no help, no direction. I mean, obviously he's an amazing little literate young man with some awesome skills happening there, but he was able to take what we'd been doing as a whole class and apply it to what he was experiencing. The little girl, this is a fun story, because we were outside and we had this really weird snowfall a couple weeks ago. And there was 3 girls, and they were kind of having this argument. So I popped over to see what was going on, what the problem was, what could just hear what the big kerfuffle was. And it was, they couldn't decide if it was snow or the cotton from the cottonwoods that was falling from the sky. If you live in Lethbridge, especially on the north end, you know all about the cottonwoods. My allergies love them. So I said, well, what's the problem? Why would it be snow? And they said, well, it looks like snow when it's falling, but when it's on the ground, it looks like cotton. And I said, well, how can we figure this out? What are we going to do? Let's solve the mystery. And so they said, well, if it's snow, it's going to feel cold and it's going to melt. Absolutely. So let's take off our mitts. Let's hold it. Let's see what happens. And of course, it was cold and it melted. And so then we were able to sort of talk about looking at the words we're looking at things using all of your senses and not just your sense of sight. In the end, the 2 other girls came, they said, yep, it's snow. Boom, they were gone. This one was like, I just don't believe it because my eyes aren't saying it. And so it was interesting too to see that she just she wasn't ready to make that reasoned decision. She wanted more information. She wanted to do more tests which is really cool. We're creating little scientists, and I think that's pretty awesome. So I just got the 15-minute warning, so I'm going to pass it back to Sharon so that we have time for questions and answers.
Okay, thank you, Christine. On the, as Mark mentioned at the beginning, our slides are all available on handouts, and all the links here are clickable when you download them. So we have a link to our text, Reason in the Balance. There's also another book that we wrote that's a collection of some of our kind of theoretical background papers about the approach. And we also have a website. The publisher at the moment is actually also offering a preview link, so you can actually click on that and get a preview of the text. And also, we've included a link to a presentation that we did previously at a critical thinking conference, which is a little more detailed than what we've done today. We've also included our email, and we would be very pleased if you want to contact us, talk about the approach, more information. We're also very open to doing some more work with workshops, professional development with teachers if people are interested. So that is that's this part, and I think Christine is going to now host the question and answer.
Actually, Christine, the questions are almost all directed at Christine. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at them, Christine.
I just started scrolling, so not
okay,
a whole lot.
Let me just warn you. The first one, which I know you've addressed, is how do the parents take to this? When you're dealing with controversial questions, perhaps students are being encouraged to take views contrary to their parents. How did you get pushback? How do you deal with it? Number of questions to that effect.
Yeah. So I am always open and honest with the parents, and I let them know that we will be sharing both sides of the argument. Absolutely. And that in the end, it's the kids' choice. It's not my choice. It's not my decision. In the end, it's what they choose. And so far, I was really nervous about the mask one. I went to admin and I said, I'm going to do this. I'm really nervous about it. Like, just heads up, you're going to get phone calls. Here it comes. But because we've built that trust up to this point in the year, I haven't had any pushback yet. I'm sure when their kids decide to either not wear or wear their mask, I might get a little pushback then. But really and truly, it's just being open with them, explaining what we're doing and why, and that it's not my agenda. That, right, as I mean, it's hard not to be biased. It's hard not to put your side on it, but really being conscientious of this is up to them. This is their research. They're directing it. We're going with them. Am I worried that decide? I am terrified that they're going to decide not to wear their masks. I'm really, really terrified. But we've been looking at all sorts of gross things about germs, and we did some pretty cool experiments with wearing their masks and not wearing their masks. And so hopefully the gross and disgusting things that are growing in my room will encourage them to wear their masks. But it is absolutely, and if they choose not to wear their masks, according to the provincial government, that is totally okay and acceptable. So if it's come to a reasoned decision, I'm nervous. Well, I'm nervous.
Another question, and I know it came up in our other discussion yesterday, which is the old time question. Someone said, I find it hard to do it in grade 1. It's slow moving, uses a lot of time. How do you get everything else important in a course? So basically, it's the time question. How do you address that?
Yeah, time is always a question. It's always a factor. It is probably the biggest issue we face in anything that we're doing. So a lot of my time, a lot of the research I do during my ABC centers, during literacy time. So the kids come through to me in small groups anyways. And so when their group comes, then we're working on their specific questions, finding their research that way. Circle time, I know I'm going to throw this out there. There's going to be a lynching. A lot of you are going to be like, this lady's crazy. I don't do calendar anymore. I don't do calendar time. Instead, I do critical thinking time. We do thinking routines. If we're not in the midst of a critical inquiry project, then we use that 10 minutes a day to work on thinking routines. We use that 10 minutes a day to really delve into our inquiry projects then. I find I actually cover the curriculum faster and in a more meaningful way this way as well. So we don't do a letter of the day. We work on the letter that we need. So if we're trying to write the word mask, well, M-A-S-K, that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to learn those 4 letters and we're going to learn them well, because it is important and it's necessary and it's tied to something. It has meaning to them. I hope that answers the time question. I just make it work. I let things go that are just traditional, that maybe aren't as effective for me.
There's a question, if you did this in a grade 4 class where they would be required to wear a mask, how would you deal with it? And I kind of have a suggestion there. You just change the question to, is it reasonable to require? Should the government have required masks? So again, you just use a little imagination here of what you can and can't ask in a reasonable way. And I guess we also want to say, if you've been successful, your students reasonably will make reasonably the right decision.
We hope. And again, like, you have to, choosing your question is the most important piece. Choosing that question, it has to have purpose. It has to have something that they have control over. And it has to be relevant. So in grade 4, it's not an option for them not to wear their mask. So you would have to rephrase it. You'd have to look at something different, right? It's knowing your curriculum, knowing your context, and knowing what the kids actually have power over. Yeah. Because I'm on the convention board, if you have specific questions or you want to see my unit plans or anything like that, just throw it in the comments, because when you do your evaluation of the session, if you throw it in the comments, I will see it. So that's the easiest way for me to see it. Or you are welcome to email me as well. I have no problem answering questions.
Another question, Christine, which occurred to me also, is given these students have minimal, if any, reading skills, how do they do their research?
So a lot of the research is either I will read a book to them, and we play the literacy game, right? Oh, let's find all the A's. Let's do this, let's do that, right? Or me reading it, what made sense to you there, what didn't make sense. Other times I will take, if it's a piece that everybody's going to be reading, I will take it and write it in simpler form for them, right? So just put the text into smaller words so that those kids that are starting to read could read it. And it's amazing how many books are out there right now that the kids actually can read. There's a whole whack load of Scholastics does a great job of information books at their level.
This question came up yesterday, and I must confess I don't really have an answer. So it's not really fair to ask you the question also, but here it is. How might you use critical thinking in a subject like math?
Yeah, math is the one I find really, really hard to do. There is a teacher who is at our school, and she has now moved, I believe. I can't remember where she went to. But she had the answers to how to do critical thinking in math. And I'm not great at it. I will be honest. That is still a struggle for me. And that's an area that I hope to grow in more. Because, yeah. But if anybody has some great ideas to share with me on that, I would love it, because that is an area that I need to grow in and figure that out still. Absolutely.
It's a question here I don't understand, but you might. Can you give us examples of the thinking routines you use?
There's a whole bunch. If you go to the Project Zero website, there's a whole bunch of thinking routines there. That is a whole nother day-long presentation for sure. I do want to address a question that came up. I do not seek consensus. We may not all come to the same reasoned decision. We all have different experiences. We have all have different beliefs. We have all different backgrounds, and consensus, a reasoned judgment does not necessarily mean consensus.
Right.
Right. And part of coming to a reasoned judgment is also being able to say, this is what I believe, this is what you believe, and I respect you for your choice, because I know you've thought it through, and that's your choice, and this is my choice. And I think we need more of that in our society.
Okay, those are great answers, of course. There was also questions about how the students present. Do they present individually, thinking about the pet project, or do they present in groups?
Oh, so the pet project, they presented in groups. Yeah. Again, it just depends on your student base and depends on your question, depends on the project. For that one, I had them present in a group because they worked in teams on their animals.
Question I have, you didn't mention, but the area in which you're teaching doesn't have a lot of upper middle class kids who've learned to argue at home. You want to talk about your clientele?
Yeah, so we have quite a mixed bag at our school. We are definitely have quite a few low-income families, so definitely poses a whole new realm for us. Our kids come in not knowing how to hold a book. They come in not knowing the difference between pictures and words, so they absolutely come in with some lagging skills for sure. I set the bar high. There's no reason these kids can't reach the same level as the other ones, and they do. And they do, absolutely they do. So yeah. We do teach, I talk to the parents too. I have a great relationship with my parents, relationship. And I let them know that we're going to be doing this. Your kids are going to be arguing. I'm going to tell you three reasons why, 3 reasons why not. Make sure yours are better. Be ready for it because they're coming home with it. So, yeah. I'm sure we did not hit everybody.
Well, there was one question, technical question. Do you teach 2 kindergarten classes or just one?
Yeah, so I have 2 kindergarten classes. When I did the pet project, I had a morning class and an afternoon class. And the mask project, I have an all day Tuesday, Thursday, all day Monday, Wednesday, and then alternating Fridays. Yeah.
So did the 2 different classes decide on 2 different pets?
No, they actually yeah, that would have been a personal nightmare. Can you imagine? Having guinea pigs is bad enough. They're living in my house now because of COVID. But yeah, no, both classes actually came to the same reason decision in the end. We started off, though, they had very similar wants and needs for the pet. So, I mean, yeah, I was hoping, again, you just never know. It is a chance. It is a chance that you're going to take that you just don't know. So pick your question carefully. If you don't want guinea pigs, do not do a pet project. I mean, it could have been really bad. I could be taking care of a lizard at my house right now. That would not have been cool. But it could have happened. It could have happened. So I think maybe what I will do too is I'm going to put my email into the chat. And then if you want to get a hold of me to see anything or talk further, you are very much welcome to do that. I love to share. I love critical thinking. It is my passion. It is my jam. So I'll talk to anybody who will talk to me about it.
Well, I really want to thank you, Christine. I can see from the questions, people are, as we were, inspired and astonished at what you could do with a kindergarten class. I think it's opened up kind of our imaginative possibilities in a way that without your presenting. And we appreciate also that you've made such a powerful use of the approach that we've advocated. So I want to thank you again for participating with us, and thank the attendees for listening. We also, as Christine did, we mentioned at the end of our presentation, our emails are there, and if you have questions or anything you want to ask us, please feel free also to ask them. And again, thanks again, Christine.
Yeah, indeed, thank you. Thank you all.